So we are here in person at the McGill University Library, which is located on land that has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee Nation, Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe Nations. ROAR honors and recognizes and respects all of these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet today. And our brick and mortar building is here in its massive brutalist bulk, and we're happy to be in it, but we're also cognizant that there are people joining from all over. So we wanted to give this acknowledgement of the place that we're in and welcoming you to this space.
Mon nom est Guylaine Beaudry, je suis la doyenne Trenholm des bibliothèques depuis septembre. Mais comme vous pouvez voir, mon association avec les bibliothèques de McGill ainsi qu'avec les humanités numériques et les plateformes de publication date depuis longtemps. Thank you so much, Nathalie, for finding this photograph. This photo was taken to celebrate the launch of an issue of the digital journal Cuisine that I had the pleasure to work on with you, Nathalie. Yes, you're probably right, around 2009, with our dear Tanya Niemann, who was at that time coming from Germany, and is still the executive director of Érudit. So I was then the director of Érudit at Université de Montréal. And today with Nathalie and her team, we are here to celebrate the myriad of ways in which library collections can be used for research. Today, research doesn't only result in papers, books, and lectures. Of course, we all enjoy that kind of objects, but the physical and digital exhibition and related resources give us a taste of, in this case, Victorian England. In part thanks to 21st century technology like the library's database subscriptions and cutting-edge artificial intelligence tools. Add to this several interactive elements like a twine detective game, as well as a Victorian vibe check, I love that, tool that measures the text alignment with Victorian era vocabulary, and you have a project that enhances engagement with the research and sparks new ideas. Look where we are now, how far have we gone? To discover new ways of looking at our different corpora. News and novel sensations is one output of the Shirk Insight Development Grant, which has employed 7 students over the past 2 years, resulting in scholarly presentations and publications, as well as such general audience outreach events as today, as this exhibition, and open access resources such as the Victorian vibe check. Over the past few years, Tri-Council funding has enabled ROAR to publish books, create games, host speakers from outside Montreal, and welcome visitors to a robust program of events. Nathalie, with, I'm sure, going in the path of my predecessor, and hello, Colleen. Again, I want to thank you for this fabulous war that you gave us at McGill, for this community, and for Montreal and beyond. Really extraordinary contribution. Thank you so much. So a big thank you to you and your team for cultivating fresh and exciting ways to explore how digital humanities can animate the treasures in our collections. Thank you. I want to end by inviting everyone here and your friends in person and those joining us from a distance on Zoom to learn more about our special collections, attend a WAR event, explore other digital exhibits online, or drop by the campus to explore a print document, an incunabula, and all the beautiful treasures that we have. Feel free to ask questions. It's amazing. We discover how librarians often discover how our users are shy to ask questions. Do never hesitate to ask a question to a librarian. We love answering questions. The only thing that we can go too long, but that you can cut us, of course. Feel free to ask questions when you visit us, and you are all welcome. I now invite you, Nathalie, to come to the podium to talk about news and novel sensations. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. I'm seeing some colleagues from the English department. I'm seeing students in the audience. I'm seeing family members that I guilted into coming, and one or two friends who I guilted into coming. But thank you. Thanks for coming for celebration. It's so nice to have people in person again for these kinds of things. And although we are going to talk about digital exhibitions, we're very proud to have an on-site exhibition and to have people coming to see it. So it really is a celebration, and I appreciate that. So in the very beginning, this project was born of our curiosity about riddles and puzzles. And Jacquelyn's actually responsible for that. She nudged us in that direction, which was prompted by an enigmatical acquisition by the library, which turned out to be a menu that was written entirely out of riddles. That preoccupation inspired a previous shirt grant. It's not going forward. Why is that? Okay, but it inspired a previous shirt grant about riddling menus in our collection, and it also inspired a shirt connections grant to get people together to talk about serious play. And it fueled our projects and kept us busy and our community entertained during the long COVID months, when we made digital games, published a pop-up book, and produced a card game, which has finally seen the light of day. So I'm actually going to pass it around. This is a huge picture. And I know that will distract from the comments, but you hopefully will enjoy seeing some of the things, right? The question was, where could we find more riddles, codes, and ciphers? And we asked ourselves where that might take place. And specifically, we wanted more riddles and puzzles that could give us a window through which to explore a particularly interesting community practice and a moment of pivotal societal change. How might decoding puzzles shed light on the communities needing to communicate covertly? Looking for inspiration, Lee Husigler, who is actually joining us from France today, and I considered a number of different puzzling practices. We looked at Chinese lanterns, for example, and Victorian fans. We looked at invisible knitting. We looked at educational books for children. We peeked inside Christmas crackers. We actually looked at Polari, which is the language for gay men in Britain. And we also looked at Rotwelsh, the secret language the Nazis tried to eliminate in Germany. And all the time, the obvious answer was right in front of me when during the evenings in lockdown, I was watching Netflix. And I was taking a look at Enola Holmes and the Bletchley Circle and Sherlock Holmes. And I suddenly realized that the personal ads of those Victorian newspapers were being co-opted for private coded communication, right? So I thought that would be a very interesting project. Now, unlike scholars of earlier decades, we had an advantage when looking at the newspaper's agony ads. McGill had an institutional subscription to Gale's historical newspaper database. So we actually had digital access to almost the full run of the Times of England. And in theory, OCR, or optical character recognition, meant that we could search it for keywords. So our plan, and note I'm using the word plan here, our plan was to capture the contents of the agonies for over a century, the second column of the first page of the Times of England, and then use the English dictionary as a stop word list so as to isolate only the ads that use cipher language. Seemed like a good plan, right? At that point, we could try to decipher the coded messages and explore which communities were drawn to coded communications. This would be a project about encryption, in other words, in the pre-digital era. The publisher Guylaine kindly gave us the contents of the Times of England on hard drives, mailed to the library, right? And Shirk very kindly decided to fund and support the project. So we had a green light. Now, part of the point was to introduce contemporary audiences to the wildly popular phenomena of the agonies in Victorian newspapers. Agonies that even Queen Victoria was a very, probably one of the famous readers of the agonies. And we also wanted to introduce contemporary audiences to the way newspapers were used to communicate when individuals were traveling and mail was impossible. Doing this, by the way, has taken a village. In addition to the team members that you'll meet tonight or this afternoon, Lee Husigler was the first project lead. He's the one joining us from France. Lillian Simons made the twine game you'll hopefully play downstairs. Stephen Lee was our first programmer. Bianca Try was our graphics wizard. Rosalia Poplawska watched newspaper movies and skimmed newspaper novels. Kristen Howard designed an original invisible knitting pattern for us. Digitization guru, who's in the back there, very talented, Greg Houston, helped navigate the touch table interface. And as well as hosting talks, we decided to mount an exhibition, which we hope you will enjoy in person downstairs. But as you'll hear from Ronny, we hit a pothole in the road because of the poor quality of the optical character recognition. So our focus shifted away from purely coded agony ads to the narratives emerging from them and the way they were read by sleuths and puzzle solvers, and the way they made their way into the other very popular entertainment of the time, novels. We eventually concentrated on the 1860s, the decade when sensation novels and agony ads were at the height of their popularity. Now, earlier critics have explored the relationship between newspaper and novels, but largely focusing on the way newspapers influence novels. And their methods have all involved close reading, that is, traditional humanist methodologies. While I, in particular, have also been reading a lot of very long Victorian novels, we additionally turn to digital humanities and distant reading methodologies to see what conclusions emerge from reading novels and newspapers at scale. Would our data validate the conclusions of earlier critics? Spoiler alert to the Victorianists in the room, the answer is actually no. Our list of newspaper novels did not correspond as closely as we expected with the lists of critics Jessica Valdez and Matthew Rubery. And also, to move beyond existing commentary on newspaper novels, we also challenged ourselves to explore ways that we might think of novels influencing newspapers, the way newspapers took a narrative turn to appeal to readers enjoying novels in such great numbers. In the exhibition cases downstairs, you will be introduced to scandalous crimes that figured in both novels and newspapers, such as that committed by Constance Kent, the 16-year-old who killed her 3-year-old half-brother, right? You will be introduced to the real-life counterparts of the fictional detectives, Sherlock Holmes, for example, or Sergeant Cuff. And you will also be introduced to Loveday Brooke, the lady detective. Now, she appeared in fiction a full 25 years before women actually appeared on the police force in real life. You'll be introduced to Victorian novels that are familiar to you, but as newspaper novels. And I think perhaps most interestingly of all, you will be introduced to the newspaper's evolution, how it moved from showcasing births, deaths, shipping news, and agony ads on the front page for over a century, until only in 1966, the personal ads retreated to the latter pages of the newspaper. But the physical exhibit is only one of the 4 things we're offering you. Let me hand things over to my colleagues who will tell you about the other 3. And first to English graduate student and our research project lead, Ronny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Nathalie, for that introduction. So the digital humanities, for those who don't know, it's reading with computers. I like to think of it as a supplement to traditional close reading practices. And as we're kind of discussing in this project, the point of using a digital humanities approach was to expand the scope of prior anecdotal analyses based on traditional close reading. It also allows us to test these critical assumptions on a wider set of novels. So whereas prior critics might read 10 or 15 novels for a book-length study, we can read something like 220, which is what we ended up doing. And these models also allow us to use computational tools to analyze our outputs. So it's assigning numbers where we would previously assign meaning to words. This is the front page of the Times. As you can see, it's a lot of information on one piece of paper. And part of our question was to how to take something this large over the kind of time frame that we were looking at, around 20 years, and isolate data from it. So right now, these are words on a page. We need them to be data points in a computer. Luckily, McGill has a plethora of digital resources that we could employ to do something like this. So I'm going to go through those now. So the first is the actual digital corpus of novels. We use 220 novels from across the 19th century and beyond, beginning in 1800 all the way to 1915, so a little bit beyond the bounds of what the Victorian period may be considered. Luckily for us, many of these texts were already digitized. They come from places like Project Gutenberg, Humboldt University, Text Lab, which is a McGill lab that works on the digital humanities, as well as places like Wikisource. But again, what we were missing was this sizable corpus of text from Victorian newspapers. And so how do we go about doing this? Well, McGill has a wonderful partnership with Gale. And what it allows us to do is mine thousands of issues, which gives us millions in words and sentences of newspaper texts. Again, it also allows us to use this larger time sample. So as before, critics would look at a decade, let's say, of novels, we can now look at newspapers over a wide time frame, in our case, 1850 to 1890. It also allows us to make use of existing library resources and institutional subscriptions. And so we decided, based on both our prior reading and on what critics had directed us toward, that it would be good to look at a smaller section. And as Nathalie explained, we came across the agony column in this way. What we needed to do now was isolate just the agony column from the newspaper writ large. And so how do we go about doing that? You might say, just read the agony column, crop all the photos to just what you're looking at and read. It's unfortunately not that easy, as we came to learn. We had a wonderful partnership with Transcribus, which is a AI text-to-image tool based out of Europe. I believe they're in Germany, which basically allows us to convert image to text, which makes historical documents machine readable. And they have a long history, Transcribus, of working with digital newspaper and historical newspaper collections. What it does, and what Transcribus gives us the ability to do, is test and train tailor models to the times. So whereas previously, scholars had been building models to read other newspapers, we ended up feeding it about a decade worth of images from the Times, so it could learn to read our specific font. As you can tell, the Times, the way it's baselined, and there's many other technicalities to it, but the way that it appears on the page is unique to Victorian England at the time, and no one else had been building models that worked for this specific era and this specific paper. This greater accuracy would allow us to have better textual outputs, as you'll see right here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the digital image as it appears in Gale's corpus. On the right-hand side is Gale's OCR, and again, that's optical character recognition. So it's how the machine reads the actual letters on the page. So the person who advertised for the next of kin of Sarah Bond is requested to communicate with R. Terrison Esquire, solicitor, Tomlinben, Norwich. And that turns into, I, UE person who advertised for next L of Sarah Bond is requested to communicate with, and it goes on. They all read like this, unfortunately. We aim for an accuracy of anywhere from 95 to 100% for the kind of analyses we wanted to be doing. These were anywhere between 15 and 35. So really subpar to what we actually needed. With Transcribus, what it allowed us to do was build basically a model on top of the existing images that we had. So we re-baselined the entire newspaper. We had a very dedicated undergraduate student, Lillian and myself, go through and type out about 50 pages worth of the Times. I'm happy to answer questions about the kind of what goes on behind the scenes, but basically what's important to know is that the final text output reads much, much better. Our accuracy rate ended up being something like 98%, where it was 15% before. So now we have millions and millions of words of information. What do we do with them? We took 500,000 sentences from both newspapers and novels, so for a total of 1 million sentences, and we fed them into a computer, and we basically sent them in blind. We said, here is a set of information, here's a set of data, classify it. We told them there was 2 groups, we didn't tell them which sentences came from which. And what it ended up telling us was a list of top, we'd call them features or terms, that allow us to identify that text back to its source. And then what we did was apply those findings back to the novels themselves. And so here's some of the findings. For example, novels use pronouns much more often than if something like a newspaper would, whereas newspapers would use proper nouns. So even if you think back to the example you just read, Sarah Kin, please communicate, that's a proper noun, as opposed to something like, he said he would, I'm going to think of Virginia Woolf now, which is wrong period, but Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself, she being the pronoun there. So novelistic language tends, at least according to our classification model, use pronouns. Novels also use past tense. They're interested in indeterminate phrases like would or might, and, as well as dialogue like said. Newspapers, the language that appears in them is much more outward facing, something like public, communicate, or inform, in addition to numbers. Lots of numbers in a newspaper, not that many numbers in novels. The model was very good at picking those sentences out. And then we used those terms and turned them back on the novels. And eventually what we were able to do was create a metric to tell us how agony-like or news-like each individual novel was. It's a rough statistic, but it's slightly more holistic in a way that a traditional close reading isn't. And I want to talk just briefly about the availability of some of these tools. So the Times Digital Archive and Transcribus are both proprietary softwares, whereas the digital corpus of novels is open access. Anyone today can go onto Project Gutenberg and read thousands and thousands of novels. That text was free to scrape right from the internet. But as we learned, even free text on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's usable in a digital humanities project. So for example, our corpus eventually accumulated 34 million plus words, hundreds and thousands of sentences, which in total were hundreds of megabytes of raw data. And it requires a sizable amount of memory to replicate this design. So just because it's available, and as you see here, it is absolutely available. This is our screenshot of our project website. You can go home today, I'm sure you all will, and download the agony columns and download the Victorian novel corpus, as well as their metadata. If you know how to use any programming software, you can play around with it. But to rerun the analyses that we did requires a lot more memory and a lot more computing power than even we initially imagined. So this is a barrier for open access that doesn't get as much attention as something like a proprietary software would. Those are very obvious barriers. And so I'm happy to answer questions later as well about more of our findings. Specifically, I want to talk about the rise of detective fiction. It gets talked about in the literature of newspaper novels and agony columns, but not necessarily in the ways that we imagined it after completing our digital analysis. Novels like Lady Audley's Secret, The Female Detective, Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone, as well as the first Sherlock Holmes in theory a novella published in Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887. these were the novels that started emerging from our analysis. They've been identified by prior critics, but not within the same temporal context that we had imagined them earlier. And so if you go downstairs and look at the touch table and move over to the data slide, you'll see these dots raised just slightly higher than the dots immediately near them within that kind of long 19th century piece of data that we show. And thank you so much for listening to all that technical language on newspapers and digital assets. I'm going to turn it over to Octavian now, who's going to tell you a little bit about the installation process for the physical exhibition.
Thank you very much, Ronny. That was an amazing presentation. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you all here in person and online. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Octavian Sopt, and I'm a documentation technician working here at the Rare Books and Special Collections Department. I am often involved with exhibitions, and I actually had the pleasure of working on this exhibition as well. So I will talk a bit about some of the challenges that we've faced and basically the whole process of installing and putting up the exhibition downstairs. Hopefully you have all seen it. It's in the main lobby downstairs in the McLennan Building. It spans 3 cases, and it actually extends to a touch table where you can interact further with the content. Undoubtedly, the most striking items that you will see are the large newspaper pages in the middle case. The easiest way to display a newspaper, a page of the newspaper, is to lay it flat on the bottom of the case. But we usually do not take the easy way. We never take the easy way for multiple reasons. One of them being it's not necessarily the safest way to display a resource, or it's not necessarily the most engaging way to display a resource. Meaning we want to avoid having a flat or a rather boring exhibition. We want to make the exhibitions pop. We want to make them look nice and attractive. And in itself, that is the point of an exhibition, right? We always try to give dimension and to also make our exhibitions aesthetically pleasing. So for this example, for the newspaper pages, we chose to actually print them on foam core for 2 reasons. The first reason is that we actually do not own the print versions of these newspapers. And the second one, even if we did own them, it's really tricky to keep something so flimsy upright or straight, or not having it bend or warp, because items in an exhibition will be there for prolonged periods of time. Sorry. In case 1, which is actually the closest case to the elevators, we have exhibited novels that were based on the cryptic messages contained in the agonies. Unlike newspapers, exhibiting books poses different challenges, a different set of challenges, and we need to select what we want to exhibit. Some books have illustrations that were relevant to our topic. So we basically opened the book to that page and we exhibited as such, or others didn't have any illustrations and we decided to simply show the title page.
However, our copy of what is perhaps the most representative novel in that case, namely The Female Detective, happens to not have the prettiest cover. So to make it pop, we have located images of alternate covers, and similar to the newspaper examples from before, we have printed and added them next to our copy in the exhibition case. In order to keep the books safely open for the duration of the exhibition and to prevent any damage, we have tied the pages with a special transparent plastic called mylar, and when needed, rested the covers on supports. As a library professional and someone who loves books not only because of their content but as objects in themselves, I like, and we all actually like, to make sure that no damage would ever be done to our collections, which is in itself part of the mission of a rare books library.
So I'll continue where Octavian left off. And I'll just grab my notes from beside you, actually, Nathalie. Thank you. So yes, I am outreach librarian, and I also work on all of these public-facing exhibitions and projects as well in some capacity. And this one was a lot of fun for me personally because I got to consult throughout on building some of the interactive and engaging elements of the exhibition. So in addition to the comments that you've heard from my co-curators and from the project lead, Nathalie, I'm going to talk about a little bit of some of the engaging and interactive elements that we have. And these are accessible to all of you from home as well. Sorry for the interruption. I did plunk the link to the project website there, and you can access all of these different ways to engage, including the large data sets that Ronny mentioned, which you can download and interact with on your own. Partly, this is all because open access is an important pillar for this project. It's one of the foundations, and we made our materials open, the process is open, it's powered by a GitHub website, and there is a database there that you can go and check out if you're literate and want to look at all of that. It's available on GitHub. So what I'm going to contribute here is get inside the thought process that wove this all together. That is the insight, I guess, that you come to a vernissage for, to get inside the mind of the curators and find out a little bit more about how things came together and the stories that the cases themselves might not tell you, but that we can. So how do we get from the Times, which you can see some posted on the wall at actual size, through the setup process that you can see on screen, and how do we get from there to here? That's one of the actual cases in the lobby. And I'll point out the top left of the screen, there's a finger pointing through the case out to the touch table. So if you were a pint-sized Sherlock Holmes, just like that small stuffy in the case, you could turn around and look at the touch table behind you. And that's where you can play through some of these interactive elements. The first, which Guylaine introduced at the beginning, the Victorian vibe check. So this is one that's a fun tool. I'll show you a little bit. I've made a little demo video of how it works. The Victorian Vibe Check was originally created as a tool to check the level of Victorian authenticity as the team was putting together elements for the game. So this tool, as you enter your text, we'll see if that plays or not. I don't think it is. But what you can do is on this platform, you can enter your text, and what it does is evaluate that text, evaluating it against that corpora of novel text, and it gives you a score on how Victorian your language is, word by word, comparing each word to essentially testing how Victorian your language is. So yes, you can see it filling out on its own. It's magic. When the technology works, right? It's magic. And we ran into those hiccups along the way in the project. The initial idea was great, but we ran into barriers and we found workarounds. And what emerged from it was this fun tool. You evaluate your words. Green comes up as an extremely common word. Color 2, obviously I plugged in a word that would be very unlikely in a Victorian context. So you'll see it come up as italicized. The word does not appear in the Victorian context. So I plugged in something, of course, very obvious. But what you can do is it gives you statistics on each word if you do click on them. So yes, we use this, we put in the script for the game, which I'll talk about in a moment. You can click on each word, see the usage statistics and get your overall score to see how common the words are, what is it anachronistic for the Victorian period, and what's out of place. And all of the information if you want. Our behind the scenes wizards, Lillian Simons is not here tonight, but a computer programmer also worked on this tool and put in a lot of hours to make it run. So my general impression is that I would be much more polite if I ran all of my writing in all of my emails through the Victorian Vibe Check before I sent them. So if you want to have a fun New Year's project, you could Victorianize your emails for a day. And of course, that is not like the be all and end all of we're safe. Okay, the next facet that you can really, I use the word play, this one you can actually play. We built a game to engage people in a different way with the stories that come to life when you interact with them in the agony columns. So this is the touch table that is downstairs, but you can play this game on the website or on the touch table. And we actually did watch someone play through and we were gratified to see it in action. So it's a short narrative game. You play as a detective for the Metropolitan Police Force, helping to solve the disappearance of a young girl named Eliza. So luckily for you, for the players, you have the help of the real life Sherlock Holmes, Ignatius Polacky, who you see on screen. He's the so-called, as I said, Sherlock Holmes, the real life one. He's on the case, and he doesn't have a pipe and he doesn't have the deer stalker, but he does have that very impressive boutonniere, the period appropriate mutton chops, and it's known that he actually advertised his business in the agony columns, but he also inserted mysterious case notes in the newspapers about his cases. So our game, we have a fictitious letter from Polacky, and the player follows along as he documents his process of working through the clues that kind of lead to working through how Eliza disappeared and where to find her. So Eliza left a trail of clues behind in the agonies of the times, and the mother is worried. She contacts and she wants a detective to help her solve the case. So that in essence is the beginning. You can play your way through by solving the various ciphers, and different styles of ciphers are introduced through the different puzzles in the game. And you see on screen here, the first one, you have to identify all of the relevant agony ads from a series of different days and issues of the newspaper to identify all of the ones that might be relevant to the missing girl. And you're seeing kind of the process. You have Polacky's head that appears with a good job or a bad job message as you play your way through. So this is the fast forward version of that. But time is of the essence as we were building this, and of course in the game you want to find the missing girl, but time is of the essence when we were building it, because you only have a captive audience for a few minutes as they come through the lobby, as they come through the exhibition. So we tried to build something that people could take either pieces of, they could play through one style of cipher like this one, which is actually, you can interact with one of these if you want. I can send you a printable template. You can build your own cipher wheel. But this one, the puzzle requires you to solve this. And this one is actually, as I turn my page of notes, it uses a Caesarian or Caesar cipher. And I wonder if any of you in the room, if you know what it is, raise your hand. If you're in the Zoom, put a message in the chat. Does anyone know what a Caesar cipher is? We have, a couple. If you're in the room, yay, we have a couple. We have enthusiasts. I knew what it was before this project, believe it or not, from a Louise Penny novel. One of the Chief Inspector Gamache novels, the Caesar cipher comes up. And what a Caesar cipher is you offset the encryption by a number. So you move, what you see on screen, perhaps the easiest way to explain it, is you move the center wheel by 4 places, and every A in your original message becomes an E. Or you move it by 12 places, and maybe I'll try and go back there. If you move it by 12 places, it becomes a different encryption. And the wheel makes it fast. You can spin and go back fast, of course. In the game, if I get my mouse in the right place, I'll just pause this for a moment. In the game, we did a shortcut for the player, which is great. You can encode with a click of a button, it changes the text on all of them. So this is what encryption is like these days. It's much easier with a digital tool. But I would argue once again, if you want to slow down in the new year, you can encode your emails if you would like to print a cipher wheel. I'm not saying that you should, but it's an idea. But that's one of the puzzles in the game. The next one is another form of encryption. So this one, every individual agony, and some of them we created, some of them are original. I'm looking at Ronny. Are they all taken from the actual paper?
The ones on the first page are these we all made.
Okay, there you go. So it's a combination of created and actual historical messages, but the encryption method is pretty common. So this one, you would reveal the message piece by piece, and there's an encoded, the numbers is actually what points you to the hidden encrypted text of a message. And so can anyone give a guess of what the numbers might represent? No, I don't blame you. It's not obvious. And that's what makes it an excellent encryption method. It actually points you to a volume number, a page number, a line number, and a word number in a specific key text that you use to identify the right words in that book for the intended recipient. You would have to agree on a key ahead of time, and they would be able to gather phrase by phrase, word by word, the message, piece by piece, to actually create the message over a series of days. Now, one thing I'll try and emphasize is this is all quite fast. We built it to be able to play through in a few minutes, but think of the time scale for the Victorians who are receiving these messages, or for Eliza and her lover in our game who are planning their escape or their plans anyway, whether it's escape or escape into love, whatever it is. If you think of the original timescale, the agonies were published in the paper. You would have to wait for the response, whether it came the next day, the day after. You would have to wait until that came, and then you would post your reply, and there would be a day or two delay at the least between each message being arranged. So it's an interesting thing, like the timescale for us is compressed. We can see all of the span of 20 years at the click of a button. For them, it's days and days. And what it did was actually hook people. So not only the intended recipients read these messages and tried to decode them, but others like Palacky tried to decode the enciphered messages. Two prominent Victorians shared the pastime of decrypting these, Sir Charles Wheatstone and Lyon Playfair, and they managed to crack some of the incredibly difficult and short ciphers in the Times in the 1850s. You can see a couple of these prominent cipher series in the case downstairs, and you'll see them. We have the actual agony ad popped up and the page that it came from below, because we thought about including more pages of the Times at their original scale, but as you can see on the wall here and in the cases downstairs, the newspapers were enormous in the Victorian period. So if you picture opening that, it would be approximately that big. If you opened it up, it was 23 inches by 29, not unfolded. So the agonies were one portion of it. We blew them up for you. You're welcome. You can read them a little easier in the case. So today, the agony column has, much like the print newspaper itself, gone out of fashion, but there are alternate methods of coded communication that you can explore. Today, Eliza's lover, that's the character from the game, they might use like Signal or Telegram encoded forms of communication, but the topic of encryption is still very relevant. Although this kind of publicly private illicit messaging that happened in the agonies is no longer, it's pretty well vanished. The culture of encryption and the precedent they set is still alive and well. So we had the strange and wonderful puzzle of building both a digital and physical exhibition and assets, and we have a lot of thank yous actually. I'll leave this on screen and you can look at it and ponder what it is, and then go to Library Ponders and find out more about it. This is one of the visualizations of those data sets that Ronny discussed. So we invite you to interact with the exhibition from wherever you are via the website, and in person interact with these elements on the touch table. And then also follow up. If you have questions about any of this material, I do invite you to reach out. You can send emails to the library at roe.library@mcgill.ca or to Nathalie. So we have come to the end of my spiel, and we're going to open it up for questions. We have a few minutes, and then Christopher Lyons is going to come up and give some closing remarks. But I will open it up to questions. If anyone is in the room, I'll ask that you ask yours, and I'll repeat it at the podium so that everyone in Zoom can hear. On Zoom, I do ask that you would put them into the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen soon.
And Jacquelyn, in the chat, we've had a request for the cipher template. So I said,
Oh, yes.
So I said, we sent it.
Sure, I can send that out. Absolutely. So I'm going to leave the acknowledgement slide up because, as Nathalie said, there are myriad people that go into a project like this. And a lot of the important contributors are here on screen, including, of course, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So I'll put an extra plug in as a thank you for the funding for the project. So yes, questions from the room. We have one. Yes. Nathalie, do you want to answer that one? Come up on screen. The question for the Zoom room is, why is it called the agony column?
The answer is because the ads were actually quite dramatic. If you read them, they're not like today's personal ads. It's, come home, we are lost without you. It really shows a kind of level of emotion that we wouldn't see in the personals today. So they were called the agony ads. And then there were agony aunts, which we still have today, who respond to questions from letter writers who talk about, how can I deal with the fact that, my daughter never pays attention to me or something. And so the agony aunts give those answers. But the name agonies actually really came into vogue in the 1860s. And that's when that term gelled.
So, Jacquelyn?
Yeah.
Sorry. So, 2 Christmases ago, I binged on Downton Abbey. No shame in admitting it.
All right. So 2 Christmases ago, my colleague Stephen
Right.
binged on Downton Abbey,
So
telling the
I think-
crowd.
So I think in the last season, there's a sub-theme of there's a butler, I just looked him up. He's this very dowdy character. He goes by the name of Septimus. I forget his last name. Anybody with the name Septimus, I guess. It's his first name. So he's a butler for not Maggie Smith, but Maggie Smith's cousin,
Mhm.
who's not quite a dowager like Maggie Smith. But, it turns out he has a secret life as an agony aunt for a newspaper.
I am recalling this. Yes.
So the housekeeper catches him and finds this out and threatens to expose him to his boss. And somehow he ends up working full-time for this newspaper as an agony aunt. It's just tremendously funny to watch. Just as a sidebar, there is a publication in Montreal I'm familiar with that publishes notices of lost items. Yes.
So interesting. So I'll summarize for the Zoom room. What Stephen has pointed out is that in Downton Abbey, actually, one of the butlers, Septimus Spry, had a second life as a secret agony aunt writing for one of the newspaper columns. So that would be the next stage from the agony columns that were personal, like we've shown in the display downstairs. Yes. There's another example of it coming up in contemporary media and culture. Thanks, Stephen. There's a couple of questions in the chat that I'm going to pass along to Ronny, who knows more about the digital side, and we will follow up with you. But it was about a specific chatbot AI that we may have used during the process. And I think perhaps Lee, who maybe even answered it in the Zoom chat. I'll scroll back and see, but let me read it to you. Okay, he answered it in the chat. Yes. There you go. But it was about Chatbot GPT.
Chatbot GPT came along probably after we started, if it's the current iteration of it. You could ask Chatbot, that would be interesting. Someone asked Chatbot GPT if they can write an agony column or like an agony ad. I don't know. It's reading the entire internet right now, so I'm sure it could.
Yeah.
I don't know how historically accurate it would be, but it could.
Okay.
Are there more questions?
Well, no, that's it for now. And Chris, if you want to come up, that'd be great.
I think this has been a really fascinating event for me, not just for its usual content, but also for the fact that you've really gotten to see several dimensions of this sort of work. You've got the sense of what's happened vis-a-vis the research itself from Nathalie. You've got a sense of what it's like to install an exhibition from Octavian. And you got a sense of the IT work and the digital brain, which I don't possess in any means whatsoever, from Ronny. And you get Jacquelyn's sense of the sort of the project as a whole, and then these fascinating elements to it. Now, I don't know if you had the same experience I did sitting here going, this is just a profound amount of work, really clever people working extremely hard to do something like this. I mean, I was trying to sort of like, if I could calibrate I was getting into thousands and thousands of hours. And this is the exciting thing that happens if you take something and some objects and some thought and you turn it into all kinds of amazing stuff. So the people that we can thank in addition to the speakers are the people here, some of them in the room as well, like Greg. And you can just, I just have to say how blown away I am and thank you so very, very much. And just the final word is I want to say that, yes, the exhibition will run between now and March downstairs. We also, for an added bonus or dessert or depending on how you do things, a salad, is in the 4th floor lobby. The former curator of rare books and special collections, Dr. Richard Ver, has an exhibition of early 19th century material. So something that predates and then corresponds to the Victorians as well, which you can have a look at too. And upcoming events on Tuesday, the 24th of January at noon, there's Coffee with a Codex, an hour of hours event. This is in person or online hybrid. And it's a chance to look at a conversation or to listen in on a conversation between our curator of medieval manuscripts, Anne-Marie Holland, with colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania's Kislik Center. And so that's coffee with, not coffee on a codex, okay? I wanted to just get that clear. That's a lot of other events coming up. Just look at our website. Thank you very much. Good day, good evening, good morning, depending on where you've tuned in from. So thank you very much.